Hey guys, it's Dr. Justin Marchegiani. Hey, it's Tuesday. We typically don't do podcasts on Tuesday, but we're here. I even did a live Q&A yesterday, Monday afternoon. So trying to mix it up for you guys, trying to keep you on your toes. I got a new Logitech camera here, so I'm trying to work it out. If you can give me a thumbs up or some feedback in the comments if you like it, that's great. Trying to get some better quality going. Evan helped me get the image centered. He said it was like the bird's nest cam. He was up here looking down at me. So glad we got that figured out, Evan. How we doing,
Yeah.
man?
Oh, I'm doing good. Life is good. The sun is shining today, so I'm feeling happy.
I got this new Lululemon shirt on, man. I just love Lululemon. It's just like I don't have to like iron stuff. It just fits good every time. We're talking about getting them as a sponsorship. I got to reach out to them again.
You should. I've got this it's like kind of like a hoodie, but it's a shirt. Oh, actually no, this one doesn't have the hood, but I just wear nothing but wool now. That's like my whole wardrobe is wool. And this company called Ibex that I was wearing, they went out of business, but hopefully they reopen. They're talking about reopening again, kind of a small company, and they make all wool clothing. Dude, wool is so good as a base layer. You never get hot, but you never get cold. It's like the perfect temperature regulator. And I've also got a wool comforter on my bed, and I don't sweat at night. You know, like some people, they have to stick their foot out under the covers to get that perfect temperature, and then you got to put your foot back in because it gets cold. With wool, you don't have to do that. You don't have to play the little footsie game.
Oh, I love that. Also, I'm looking at the chili pad. Have you heard of that yet?
I have. There's several people in our space that use it, but I just
What do you
don't
think?
know. It's like, do you really need that?
Well, for me, being in Austin, when it gets hot, I mean, just for the listeners, chili pad's like a mattress pillow top, but there's a little layer of water in between, and you can control the temperature on that water between 55 degrees Fahrenheit to 105. So when it gets really hot in Austin, I'm just like, ooh, that could be really nice to go under the covers and have a nice 55-degree kind of coldness in there. It's saving my AC bill a ton.
That now the AC bill thing, that is smart.
Totally.
That's really smart.
So I'm going to try biohacking that out and see how it works. And I'll come back to everyone here listening and report back and let you know what I'll think.
Please, that sounds good.
All right, cool.
So let's chat about neurotransmitters. We already have a question here from Charlie, which we'll get into. How do you know the lack of transmitters is due to dopamine or serotonin or mitochondria related? And the answer, Charlie, would be that we test for it, which is why Justin and I don't really like to guess and check so much. I mean, we will use some supplements that are sort of like a quick fix based on symptoms, which we'll discuss today. But this is why we utilize organic acids testing, because you get a read into the mitochondria, but you also get a read into neurotransmitters. So that's how you know, is you test. But what we wanted to discuss today, maybe Justin, let's start with dopamine, because so many people have issues with dopamine. This is going to be part of your catecholamines. Your catecholamines was your noradrenaline, or if you call it norepinephrine, and your epinephrine, or your adrenaline, and then dopamine. That's the whole class called catecholamines. And that's really responsible for your energy, your drive, your focus, getting things done. And many people, including children, and especially teenagers that are addicted to video games, they have issues with dopamine. And the parents will tell you, hey, my kid can't get stuff done at school. He doesn't do his homework, and he's addicted to video games. What are you drinking there?
Oh, I got a nice little green drink, organic green devotion. So it's got celery, cucumber, spinach, lettuce, kale, lemon, parsley, no added sugar from any fruit. So just those veggies.
Oh, good. Cheers. So what I was saying is, these neurotransmitters, the catecholamines as a whole, typically they're going to be low together. So on the organic acids, you'll see the markers for dopamine, and then you'll see the markers for adrenaline and then noradrenaline. The thing that's cool about this is there's an adrenal component too. And so we often find on our adrenal testing that the adrenals are low. And then when the adrenals go low, you're also low with the adrenaline, the noradrenaline, cortisol may be low. So the whole thing just falls apart. And we're going to talk about some remedies and things you can do to support this, but you've always got to make sure you've got the full puzzle piece, because if you're just working with the practitioner that does amino acids, which is great, that's still a limited approach.
100%, right? So you mentioned earlier, we have some of the testing where we look at some of the metabolites. We look at like the 5-hydroxyindole acetate, which is a marker for serotonin. We can look at the homovanillate, which is a marker for dopamine. And we can look at the vanilmandrolate, which is a marker for adrenaline. These are important. Now, the thing is, when we look at adrenaline and dopamine, they're kind of intimately connected, because if we look at the hormonal, or we look at the neurotransmitter cascade, we have phenylalanine, which goes to tyrosine, and then tyrosine goes to L-DOPA, and then DOPA, it goes to dopamine, but then it also can go downstream into norepinephrine. right? Which is your catecholamines or your adrenaline, right? It's like three things that are the exact three different names for the same thing.
Yep.
Adrenaline, noradrenaline, norepinephrine, catecholamines, they're kind of in that adrenaline category, right? Noradrenaline, adrenaline, they're just kind of derivatives. Norepinephrine, epinephrine, they're just derivatives. So the more stressed you are, the more you're going to burn up your dopamine. So if you're doing, like you kind of alluded to earlier, like a lot of intense video gaming, a lot of like addiction behavior, a lot of extreme sports, like you're really pushing that catecholamine level up, which you will start depleting your dopamine levels. And sugar is one of the biggest culprits. The more refined sugar you eat, that increases dopamine or L-tyrosine crossing the blood-brain barrier, which then increases your dopamine in your brain, which is that I love you kind of neurotransmitter feeling. So that can really add stress and burn up your dopamine. So we can even see it high on the organic acid testing, or we can even see it low where we're kind of in this more depleted kind of state.
Yeah, so long story short, neurotransmitters, they have a Goldilocks zone to them. You don't want too low dopamine because then you're having an issue with concentration, focus, drive, getting things done. But also you don't want too high dopamine because that's when you start to seek out like bad behavior and you may get aggressive. Now, Great Plains has an article on this, and I just sent you the link so you can look at it. It's in the Gmail chat that we had going. It's a link where Great Plains discusses, and they have this really pretty picture about neurotransmitters and how you can actually have a buildup of dopamine due to gut bugs. So the Clostridia, the C. difficile, and then other Clostridia species, you can have an elevation of 4-cresol or HPHPA, which are two organic acids that Justin and I measure on the urine. And if you have those elevated, those gut bugs, what happens is it inhibits this enzyme called dopamine beta hydroxylase. And when that happens, you get a buildup of dopamine. And then basically you're just going crazy. You're just off your rocker. You're just raging. And, you know, we've worked with children and teenagers where we've seen these gut bugs like Clostridia, and the kids are acting up in school, or the adults are road raging and they're just crazy. And you treat these gut bugs, and all of a sudden that enzyme starts working. It breaks down the excess adrenaline and dopamine. And then all of a sudden the person's calm again. So you can be on either end of this spectrum with dopamine, and you don't want to be on the ends. You want to be somewhere in the middle.
100%.
Do you see that picture? Did you see that link I sent you?
One.
It's greatplainslaboratory.com/Clostridia. But I put it to you in the chat on the Google chat we had.
Great. I'll go grab that. That's perfect.
But it's got a picture, and maybe we can put this picture in the show notes. But what it shows is how neurotransmitters, everything works good until you have gut bugs. But then if you've got these Clostridia issues, what happens is the tyrosine is actually converted into 4-cresol, and then that messes up the enzyme, and then all of a sudden dopamine goes sky high, and then you're really aggressive. And so what they talk about is, okay, hey, look, now you've got to look at these people with autoimmune diseases, ADHD, autism. You have to consider gut bugs as a factor for their mental health issues.
Right, exactly. So let me just go share my screen here so we can get a window of that. I think that'll be awesome.
That would be cool.
I'll do a screen share here real quick for everyone. All right, cool. Let's share.
There it is.
You see it there?
I do see it. Yep. Try to zoom in a bit on that picture if it'll let you.
Yeah. So let's go here, for instance. So anyone listening to this, if you're listening on the podcast, you should go click on the video link below, or subscribe at our YouTube site, justinhealth.com/YouTube, or go to Evan's site as well. But you can see we have tyrosine, right? Tyrosine's our amino acid building block. And tyrosine, again, comes from phenylalanine. But you can see what happens is tyrosine can go over here into dopa and then dopamine. And then this is one of the metabolites we look at, the homovanillate, which gives us a window into dopamine, like I mentioned earlier. And then we have norepinephrine and epinephrine. So it always goes norepinephrine to epinephrine. So norepinephrine is the precursor to epinephrine. So one of the questions was, how's noradrenaline and adrenaline different? Well, noradrenaline is another word for saying norepinephrine. Adrenaline's another name for saying epinephrine. So it goes norepinephrine, epinephrine, and then this VMA, vanylmandylate. And you can see what happens is this phenylalanine can really go downstream and become more of these metabolites of the Clostridium. That's why they talk here about how Clostridia can interact with the neurotransmitters and really affect some of the dopamine levels. Do you want to comment on that, Evan, more?
Yeah, so basically if you're looking at this, you're like, okay, what does this mean to me? Well, this means that if you have mental health problems, you really need to look at the gut, because oftentimes you can add in amino acids. Charlie asked us the question about, well, for low dopamine, should you take DLPA or L-tyrosine? The answer is you technically could take either or of them. DLPA would be great because that's called D-L-phenylalanine. That can actually get converted over into dopamine as well. And that actually can get converted into norepinephrine, epinephrine, I believe, too. I believe the whole conversion process. So I guess let's look at the chart right there, Justin. So like if we're doing DLPA, we're basically hitting that phenylalanine button right there at the top. So that phenylalanine can get converted into tyrosine, but then if that other process is working, that can also boost norepinephrine and epinephrine, which is your endorphins.
Yeah, what I understand is DLPA tends to go more down the endorphin pathway than it does the dopamine pathway.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think maybe, I don't know if we could divide it up as a pie chart, like 80% endorphin, 20% tyrosine. I don't know if it's that black and white or not.
And again, with beta endorphin, like the big thing we see with that is going to be like sensitivity to pain. We're also going to see a lot of cravings and like very emotional, like incredibly emotional. Tends to have some addictive tendencies to opiate kind of compounds. On the tyrosine side, it tends to be more energy, tends to be more focus, more concentration, more drive, more sweet cravings, more caffeine, more chocolate, those kind of things. So we can look at some of those symptoms. If people have chronic pain issues, we'll definitely look at giving them some DLPA to provide some building blocks to that pathway. But you can see here that the kind of take home is that having the Clostridium issues can really affect the building blocks that go downstream to your dopamine and your adrenaline, which can make it harder for you to focus and have a healthy stress response. Would you agree?
I would agree. Well said. We'll cancel your screen share so we can see your pretty face again.
Hey, one last thing. Let me hide this over here for you. So here's the serotonin spectrum. So you can see we have tryptophan, 5-HTP, serotonin, and then melatonin. So you can see when we have issues breaking down our amino acids over here, that can affect just having digestive issues. That can affect ultimately getting serotonin. And serotonin is important for mood and then obviously the sleep. And sleep's really important for repair. So of course you can have anxiety, mood issues, depression, and poor sleep. This is the serotonin spectrum. And then on the dopamine side, you can see we have phenylalanine, tyrosine. So when we support people on the amino acids, we give them tyrosine, but we also give them L-DOPA as well to provide those building blocks. And then you can see dopamine goes into norepinephrine, then epinephrine. This is the precursor. So the more stressed you are, you'll pull downstream to make more of your adrenaline, and that pulls from dopamine. So of course, on the dopamine spectrum, we have addictions like smoking and overeating and excess sugar to the extreme of Parkinson's over here, which is pretty interesting. Now, I want to show you one more thing over here. This is interesting because if you look at, this is like people talk about MTHFR. This is basically the cycle that has a major effect on that. So we have our folic acid cycle or our folate cycle, which then turns the cycle of methionine. We need healthy B6, B12, methylated B12. Ideally, we need activated L-MTHF folate if we have an MTHFR issue and we can't metabolize folic acid. But look, right? Look over here. We have norepinephrine. Remember, it goes dopamine, then norepinephrine. So norepinephrine and epinephrine, that conversion involves lots of sulfur amino acids. So if we have poor digestion of our sulfur amino acids in a lot of our healthy animal products, that can have a major effect with our stress response because these sulfur amino acids help activating our neurotransmitters for stress. But also, look, these same sulfur amino acids go down here and become what? They become cysteine and glutathione helps with toxicity. And so if we don't have enough glutathione and we get exposed to lots of Roundup or pesticides, well, guess what that's going to cause? More damage to the same neurotransmitters we're trying to support to begin with. Does that kind of drive the point home? So digestive issues can affect it on the Clostridium side, the C. diff side, Clostridium difficile. Also, we have nutrients over here that are involved, B6, B12, folates. We also have the proteins, the tyrosine and the serotonin and the 5-HTP, which we need healthy digestion. And then also the sulfur amino acids here to activate our adrenaline and noradrenaline and also our glutathione. So
it's a trip. And I've seen too that just like you mentioned the SAMe activating the norepinephrine, epinephrine, it also helps like deactivate. So I've read about people that are just stressed out like crazy and they've got a buildup of those endorphins. You can have too much that SAMe can act as a methylator to kind of detox you, if you will, from excess adrenaline. And I felt it when I take SAMe, I can kind of feel the, I don't know, maybe the adrenaline getting out of my body. And I've
Right.
heard magnesium can help do that too.
100%. 100%. Did you want to add anything there?
Well, so let's just recap like symptoms. You know, you hit on the serotonin piece. So you had read some off, but I want to just read them back to people again. This would be like depression, but the depression you get from low serotonin is different from the depression you get with low dopamine. Dopamine depression is more like a lack of energy. I can't get off the couch. And maybe the serotonin depression's that same way, but a lot of times there's also going to be worry. You mentioned the anxiety, low self-esteem could happen. And then like winter depression, and then could be irritability, could be rage, panic, night owls, hard to get to sleep. Those are all serotonin symptoms. Whereas the dopamine is more just, I can't focus, I can't concentrate, I can't get anything done. Serotonin's more like, I'm emotional, I have negative self-talk, that type stuff. And you could be, people may say, well, I resonate with both of those symptoms. We see it all the time that you're low in dopamine and serotonin.
I agree. So, I mean, what's the take-home message there? We can use symptoms to kind of help gauge us, mood issues. We can use motivation issues, focus issues, concentration issues. We can use anxiety, right? We didn't really even touch about GABA. Did you want to highlight a little bit more about GABA? GABA is kind of that inhibitory neurotransmitter. So it kind of helps us turn off. So think about it like this. When we get wound up, it's really hard to come down from that and wind down. And GABA is really important because it helps kind of think about it as you're driving a standard car. You're in fifth gear, you're on the highway, you're going 60, 70 miles per hour. You need to now slow down. Imagine if you just keep it in fifth gear and you can't downshift from 5 to 4, 3 to 2, 2 to 1, so that you can go back at normal speed for driving on a street. You're kind of stuck in that fifth gear. And you know what happens when you got a really small fifth gear and you're trying to accelerate on the street. You can't do it because the gear is too small. It's the same thing. We're just wound up too much and we need that GABA to be able to come down.
Yeah, well said. GABA's changed my life. I mean, I carry a formula called GABA Chews, which is just a pharma GABA, and it's a natural form of GABA that is actually a bit more effective than just straight GABA. So I recommend people look into a GABA supplement and have it on hand. I keep them in my coat pocket. Like if I'm going to go travel, I'll have like a little baggie or something of just a few GABAs in my pocket, and I'll just chew that up like before I get on an airplane. And it can be really relaxing. It can help with sleep as well if you take a little bit of GABA before bed.
It's great feedback. Anything else you want to add here so far?
Well, let's look at the questions. We had a couple come in. Kim asked, how do you feel about mucuna? She's talking about the mucuna purins, which is, I believe it's a seed extract for Parkinson's.
Yeah, it comes from the velvet bean. So that's actually pure L-Dopa. So in my Dopa Replete Plus product, we actually use that.
Cool. What do you feel about it for Parkinson's?
I think it's great. I mean, again, they're giving the Cinemet drug, right? The carbon or the levodopa. So they're giving a lot of that. The problem is when you give medications like that, the enzyme amino acid decarboxylase, that enzyme is upregulated. So then now you're also going to be burning up a lot of the building blocks for serotonin. So you can create functional serotonin deficiencies when you're giving Cinemet or levodopa. So then a lot of these people that have dopamine issues, they tend to also have a lot of serotonin symptoms. So if you give the L-Dopa, you want to be giving at least a little bit of the serotonin support so you can support both sides of it and you don't create a functional serotonin imbalance.
Wow. Yeah, that's very great advice. We had another question here from Charlie. He was asking, rhodiola and other adaptogens affect neurotransmitters too, right? Yes, I believe they can support them. I'm not sure if you can say XYZ is going to crank up things, but for example, with ashwagandha, we do know that ashwagandha hits on the GABA receptor.
Right.
So that's good. And then the other question he had was, once dopamine levels are replenished with tyrosine, can you stop these supplements forever, or will you always be genetically susceptible to low dopamine? And then he put in parentheses ADD symptoms.
I think it comes down to a couple things. If you have Parkinson's, then there's going to be destruction in the midbrain area of the cells in the substantia nigra. So your ability to make dopamine is going to be less. So you may have to be on those forever, depending on if we can get regeneration. If we can't get regeneration, then we got to make sure we increase the L-Dopa. We got to increase the tyrosine to make sure there's enough building blocks. Number one. Number two, we got to make sure that if there's gut issues and digestive issues, that we fix that. So if we have Clostridium issues, or if we have malabsorption at all, we have to make sure we fix the gut, the SIBO, the bacterial issues, the parasites. We can break down our proteins and fats, and we're utilizing hydrochloric acid and enzymes so we can break those foods down. And then number three, we got to make sure stress is under control. So I have a product that I use here, Brain Replete, which has a lot of the tyrosine and 5-HTP in a 10-to-1 ratio, which is balanced. So I'll actually do some of these. I do about 6 capsules a day, and I take it with a little bit of the Dopa Replete Plus, which it actually is. It has the mucuna in there. It's got some N-acetyltyrosine. And just because I work 12 hours a day, and I want to be on for my patients. So I take that partly because I do organic acid testing that shows that I still need it. Of course, I try to make sure sleep is good. I mean, I had a newborn 6 months ago, so sleep isn't ideal, but in general, taking the amino acids are going to be key. Higher up, we always want to make the diet and lifestyle changes. We always want to fix the gut. We always want to make sure any underlying autoimmune stuff where we have it addressed by fixing the leaky gut, fixing the infection, to getting on an autoimmune template, at least initially.
Yep, well said. And I mean, how many nursing homes are out there with hundreds and thousands of patients in there with Parkinson's and other neurocognitive problems, and they're just getting fed biscuits and gravy and sugar and jello and stuff like that for breakfast and lunch. I mean, the diet of a nursing home is typically just terrible. So you're not getting any of those amino acids from the diet to even try to manufacture neurotransmitters on your own. So that's just huge. And the diet piece, if you're not, like you spoke about the gut issues, for one, if you're a vegetarian or a vegan, you're not getting animal proteins, you're not going to be getting the raw materials necessary to make these brain chemicals. Even if you are eating high quality meats, if your digestion's compromised because you've got something like an H. pylori infection or parasites, it doesn't matter how much grass-fed beef you eat. If you can't digest, you're not going to be able to replenish these brain chemicals with diet alone. So at some point, amino acids are a necessary step, and maybe a temporary thing, or they may be longer term, just depending on the case.
I think that's great. So let's look at here a couple other questions. Is there anything else you saw that you wanted to see? Well, we got a lot of questions coming in here.
Yeah. There was another question here. GABA versus L-theanine. So L-theanine can actually increase GABA.
Yes.
You could think of theanine as maybe like a precursor to GABA, and you can find theanine naturally in like a matcha tea, which I love because it's a caffeine plus theanine combo. So matcha tea is a great option, or you could just take straight theanine. I don't find theanine works as good as GABA. Justin, what's your take on theanine?
I think theanine, I mean, again, I use a couple of products that have the GABA in it and that have the L-theanine combined with the GABA. So when I typically do a GABA product, it has L-theanine already in there. So for me, I do pretty good, but I don't typically take GABA alone. I take them in conjunction. I think it supports it. A lot of people that don't do well on coffee tend to do well on green tea because the green tea has a lot of the GABA L-theanine precursors, so they get relaxed while they have a little bit of that caffeine. So I think slow caffeine metabolizers do really well on a green tea over a coffee for that reason.
Yeah, good point there. Jeff had just a comment and then a question. Yeah, he said he thinks he's had this challenge for a while, PTSD. So he's had all sorts of anger, anxiety, irritability. So I mean, the aminos are great, but then one other thing too, which I've used a lot with PTSD with veterans and such, is the magnesium L-threonate product, because that magnesium crosses the blood-brain barrier. So it's the only form of magnesium that I know of that can get into the brain. So look it up, magnesium threonate, and you can supplement with that. I have a formula called Calm Clarity where I use 2 grams of it per 3 capsules, and you can just take that forever, and it works like a charm.
Totally. And if you have PTSD issues, you really want to do some EMDR or EFT type of techniques, the tapping. EMDR is more of like the eye movements where you look left or right or up or down while you're thinking about the issue. EFT combines that when you're doing the gamut point here. It'll have you do eyes one direction, one the other, hum a song, do a number. It's basically going right brain, left brain, eyes up, eyes down, which uses different parts of the brain. So it's having you hold that thought while you activate lots of parts of the brain. Then when you come back to that thought or that trauma, it's the pathways is kind of like messed up. It can't quite go down it easily. It's like taking a path in the woods that's perfectly clear, and it's like knocking a whole bunch of tree branches over it, so it's harder to see, harder to walk down it. So EMDR, EFT, Google that. We'll put some references in the show notes on it, but that's going to be essential. There's a lot of good videos on that. YouTuber by the name of Brad Yates has some really good EFT info. Also, Daniel Hill has some great EFT info on that too. Just Google him on YouTube.
I need to look up the EDMR. Like, so do you have any practitioners or anybody you'd recommend for that? Because I'd like to learn more about that. I know EFT like a charm, but the MDMR, I don't know anything.
Yeah, I work with someone by the name of Daniel Hill. He's out of London, and he's great. He combines the EMDR with the EFT and with the NLP. DanielHill.biz, I think, is his website. So he's great. He's a really good resource.
Have you had him on the podcast?
I'm not yet, but I got to have him on soon.
You should. That'd be cool. All right, let's look at a couple of the questions here. Yeah, so people were kind of giving Jeff some ideas here about using magnesium. I think that's great.
Magnesium's great. Absolutely. I think GABA and L-theanine are also great. I mean, you guys are giving we got the smartest listeners, man. I'm so proud. They just give such great feedback.
I know.
Love it.
So fun. Charlie said, 10-to-1 tyrosine 5-HTP ratio.
It's a good starting point. Yeah, it's a good starting point. If you have more issues, more stress stuff, you may have to go a little bit higher on the tyrosine, but that's a pretty good starting point. And I think in my product, we did it at 10-to-1 off the bat, but I'll typically throw in the Dopa Replete Plus if we need it. And again, we'll look at the symptoms on the handout we showed, and then we'll also look at the metabolites on the organic acid to make that clinical call. So it's a combination of symptoms, it's a combination of lab testing, and it's a combination of what works. And you can typically see some improvement there.
Well, and just having a clinician hold your hand through this, because I'm a huge fan. Both you and I are a huge fan of like do it yourself and fixing things. But with neurotransmitters, I don't advise people just go buy a bunch of amino acids and just start throwing stuff together if you don't know what you're doing. Because with tyrosine, I mean, you could push yourself into anxiety territory. If you've got an anxiety history already, you could give yourself heart palpitations, maybe panic attacks and such. So I just wouldn't play with it. And then also the note about 5-HTP or anything working on serotonin. If you're already on an SSRI medication, you cannot be taking 5-HTP with it without a practitioner. You've got to really get help there, because you could give yourself serotonin syndrome, and you don't want that.
Yeah, and that's pretty rare in the scientific literature. I've seen a lot of psychiatrists and people like that say, oh, be careful, like don't take amino acids. You're going to get serotonin syndrome. You're not going to get it with amino acids. You're going to primarily get it with drugs, with medication. So I think a good rule of thumb is if you are doing medication, try to take it away from some of the amino acids, and be aware if you're taking like an SNRI, selective norepinephrine reuptake, SNRI, selective norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor that works more on dopamine, or an SSRI that works more on serotonin. Kind of look at the symptoms of the serotonin drug and the norepinephrine drug, because you may have more side effects because the drug is going to work better because it's a reuptake inhibitor. So it's blocking the reuptake ports. So if you're blocking the reuptake ports, there's going to be more neurotransmitter in between the synapse. So if you're taking more building block, which becomes that neurotransmitter, that can basically allow more neurotransmitter to accumulate between the synapse. Here's the presynaptic neuron, here's the post. In between here's where all the neurotransmitters hang out. And if we dump a whole bunch of extra amino acids out that now convert, there's going to be more of these guys in between to have that synaptic increase in those neurotransmitters. Does that make sense?
It does. Now, would you say don't mix amino acids in these drugs, or do you feel like if you were doing it intelligently with a practitioner, you could mix drugs and aminos?
You got to work with a practitioner, and you got to be aware of the side effects. And typically, if we have a side effect of the higher serotonin, you can look at the medication you're on. Just go to rxlist.com, look at the side effects of it. And if you see side effects start to increase as you incrementally increase the amino acid dosages, number one, take the amino acids away. And then number two, we got to go back to that prescribing physician to have them decrease the dosage. A lot of times they're like, oh, well, let's decrease the amino acids. Why? I'd rather use amino acids that are natural than a drug that has lots of side effects and even black box warnings. A lot of times I'd rather use nutrition. Nutrition always trumps drugs, especially if they're having a positive effect.
Yep. Charlie had a question about alpha brain helping neurotransmitters. I used to work on it, and I actually was working kind of behind the scenes on one of the reformulations of alpha brain. Aubrey and I were kind of going back and forth. It was funny. One day he gave me a sample. It was going to be like alpha brain 3.0 or something. It was a new formula, and I didn't know exactly what was in it. I just took it and ran outside, and I felt the supplement kick in, and I just like started sprinting out in the field, and I was like, oh my God, I have so much energy. And I came back in, I said, Aubrey, what did you put in this? And he goes, oh, we added some B vitamins to that formula. And I thought, oh my gosh, I can feel it. So yeah, Alpha Brain, it's a very, very popular formula. They sell tons of it. I think for this conversation, because this was more clinical based on like XYZ symptom, you're probably better off just piecing things together. Now, I think an all-in-one solution is good, but if you have a certain symptom, you may not need to push the serotonin button. You may need to just push the dopamine button, or you may need to just push the GABA button. And so I'm a bigger fan of just trying to mix things based on your symptoms. Now, if all the symptoms that you look at match up with all the neurotransmitters in a formula like that, I think awesome. But for me personally, I just use things in isolation. Justin, do you have a take?
Yeah. So in the Onnit Alpha Brain formula, there's a lot of things that increase acetylcholine, and acetylcholine is really important for like memory. They do a lot with it with like Alzheimer's type of things. Alpha glycerophosphocholene, Bacopa, huperzine, right? These are things to increase acetylcholine. So I think that's helpful. They do a lot of L-leucine, a lot of amino acids in there as well. The big thing is they do a lot of tyrosine, theanine, and phosphatidylserine. So phosphatidylserine is going to help with the high cortisol. And of course, the tyrosine is going to help with the dopamine, and the theanine will help with the GABA. I don't see any B vitamins in this formula. Did they add that later?
It never, I don't think it ever
happened.
hit the shelf. I think it was just like a trial behind the scenes, but I just remember taking it and it was like, whoa, that was a strong product.
Any thoughts on acetylcholine?
Yeah, I mean, so acetylcholine, it's helpful. I know like the huperzine and the Bacopa, I think they call those acetylcholinesterase inhibitors. So it kind of just forces the acetylcholine in your brain to sit there longer. And I think it's great. I mean, I had good success with using huperzine and other herbs. So I think it's just something else to put in the toolbox.
Yeah, it's kind of like an SSRI or an SNRI. Like obviously it's not a drug, so it's going to have a little bit more of a modulatory effect. It's not going to really knock things out as effectively, but which it's good as well, because you don't want to have a lot of the negative side effects that you get with a lot of these drugs too. So yeah, acetylcholine is really important for muscle contraction, brain function. And again, a lot of these compounds, a lot of them, they all come from protein, right? So having adequate levels of protein are going to be huge for performance. And if we can't digest our proteins well, that's going to be a major issue. So having adequate digestion is important. So like you can get into the supplement world, like this herb or that amino acid, like you have your hierarchy: diet, sleep, blood sugar stability, tied to insulin resistance, work on your digestion, work on some of the nutrients. B vitamins are really important. B6, P5P is really important for activating a lot of our neurotransmitters. If you look at B6 or pyridoxal 5-phosphate or pyridoxine hydrochloride, and if you look at, just Google that and like neurotransmitters, they're intimately involved in synthesizing and these amino acids converting into dopamine and serotonin, etc. So if we don't have adequate B6 levels, or we have a lot of dysbiotic bacteria and our gut bacteria is not helping out with the B vitamin issues, we can have some issues for sure.
Yep. Well said. So get tested, dial in the diet. I mean, you could take somebody who's, eating processed food and drinking soda and take a bunch of amino acids and probably not get the success that they're looking for. So as just a disclaimer, every time we have a conversation together with you guys, it's always, we're assuming you've got the diet, the lifestyle, the sleep, the meditation, the stress management, the exercise, the good relationships, good stable blood sugar. You're not skipping meals. You're getting toxic people out of your life. You're going to bed on time. You're not using too much technology at night. Those are all the precursors. Then amino acids come in.
100%, 100%. And now just a couple other questions here. Some listeners put in, they talk about for insomnia, 5-HTP. Now in my line, we have one, again, you can get your products wherever you want. We're going to talk about the ones that we formulated because we're the most familiar with it. So in my line, Serotonin Replete, it's 100 milligrams of 5-HTP with a little bit of B6. So if you're going to use 5-HTP before bed, I typically do 1 to 2 at dinner and then 1 to 2 before bed. The B6 is really important to take with it. So you just got to be mindful. B6 helps it go down the serotonin pathway, not the quinolinate pathway. So B6 really helps the neurotransmitters move in that right direction. And, start at 100 milligrams. You can go up to 400, even 600. Again, if you're really having some difficult time, you should work with a practitioner. You don't want to spot treat it. But I want to give you guys actual clinical information and not tiptoe around all these solutions and hold them back. So hopefully that helps.
Yep. Well said. I'm out of time, so I don't know if we have other questions, but let's try to do maybe one more.
Yeah, I mean, let's do one last thing, Evan. Can we just kind of summarize the neurotransmitters and the symptoms that they correlate with, just so the listeners have a better idea? Can we go back and redo that?
Yeah, let's do it. You lead us off. Pick one.
Okay, awesome. So if we go back and we look at dopamine, right? Dopamine is important for focus. It's really important for cravings, energy, mood, attention, right? Feeling happy, okay? Then we're going to have serotonin next. Serotonin, or 5-HTP precursors, is going to be important for worry, negativity, winter, sad, seasonal affective disorder, PMS, chronic pain issues, sleep, hyperactive. We have our chronic pain issues or overly emotional, can be our beta endorphin, which is important for reward and pleasure. We have GABA, which is our, overstress, can't relax, can't wind down, can't chill the hell out.
Yep.
Then glutamine can be sugar cravings, and but that can also be serotonin too. So I typically don't worry about glutamine. I always just add that in for the gut. I don't spot treat the brain with that though. I'm not really worried about that. And I think we hit it all. So we have the GABA, the wind down, the 5-HTP, kind of the mood, the blues, those kind of things, and then the dopamine is going to be the cravings and the energy and the focus.
That's good. I think we hit it. And we could probably do a part 2 to this. I mean, I think we hit all the important key takeaways, but if you want to talk about how all of this factors into a full functional medicine program, including the gut work and things we're doing, working on infections, adrenal support, maybe we'll save that for part 2.
I think it's really important when people talk about functional medicine, like imagine we're building this huge house, right? This huge house. Like we just talked about, like the third room on the second floor. And a lot of people can come in and be like, oh, I'm going to go after this. I'm going to just do this thing right here. But like we're building the whole house. Like just worrying about this one room on this one floor isn't that big of a deal to us. We're starting at the foundation. We're building that first floor, and then we're adding onto it, and then we're adding onto it. So we kind of have the big architect picture when we're looking at it. We don't get totally absorbed into one. Again, people may say, I did serotonin or 5-HTP support, or I took your brain complete and it changed my life. That's great. That may have been really key, but we can't ignore the whole big picture. So comprehensive program, don't guess, assess, test, really figure it out. Start with the foundations, work your way up. Don't ignore the gut. The gut's the missing piece for a lot of people.
I agree. Well said. And if you guys want to reach out, schedule a call with Justin or myself, check out Justin's site. That's justinhealth.com. You can go schedule a consult. And then if you want to schedule a consult with me, that's my site, Evan Brand, EVAN, brand like brand name.com. Reach out. One of us are happy to help you. We work with aminos every day in the clinic, and this stuff has changed our lives, and we know it can change yours.
Absolutely. Any last questions you wanted to nail, Evan?
I saw one that somebody mentioned that GABA made them feel like out of it or something. I mean, you would just try something else. Try theanine, try taurine, try something else, try ashwagandha, something else that can modulate the GABA receptor, but maybe straight GABA is not a good fit for you.
Absolutely. And then someone talks about their balance and their legs feeling heavy. Hard to say. I would look at gut. I would look at adrenals. I would look at diet, all that first, because like if you make a couple little tweaks in the foundational things, it's like all these things improve. So that's why we start with the foundation, because so much of this crap in the periphery clears up when we set the foundation. So hard to say. We need to work on the foundational stuff first.
Yeah. And look, get your ferritin tested. Could be some simple anemia issue possibly.
Oh, totally. And also vitamin D, low vitamin D can affect the vestibular system and balance. Wow. Let's see here. Anything else? I want to have my functional medicine. I want to have functional medicine help so much. Like it. Awesome, Jeff. Yeah, feel free. Any questions, let me know. Scrappy Puppy writes in, I have H. pylori now. I'm going to get rid of this. I don't want to take an antibiotic. Go look at some of our previous podcasts on that. I think we hit some good stuff, Evan. Let's call it a day, brother.
Let's do it.
All right, man. Hey, great chatting with you. Appreciate it. Keeping it real. All the listeners, give us a share. Hit that bell. Give us a share. Let people know sharing is caring. We appreciate you spreading the word. Again, it's our mission to help over 1 million people a month with these issues. 12 million a year, moving into 100 million next year. So help us with our goal, guys. We appreciate it.
Take care.
Evan, take care.
See ya.